Hello, this is Daniel from soundheadquarters.com. In today's video, we are building these custom acoustic fabric walls and transforming the studio from this to this. I'm going to show you step by step the whole process of framing out these acoustic fabric walls, applying the acoustic insulation, the upholstery, the final trim, every step of the way to get the finished product. So let's get right into it. Here is the client's existing space. This is a music school in Waterdown, Ontario, where we did the initial renovations in 2022, where we had put acoustic panels up on these walls, but those panels have now been moved into the large studio room to be placed on the ceiling, and we are now replacing those panels with custom built-in acoustic fabric walls. So that is the lumber that we're using to frame out these walls. It is just 2x2 lumber, 2x2x8, and I'm just cutting these to size. What we're going to do is we're going to screw together frames that will then get screwed into the wall. These frames are going to accept the acoustic insulation, and the wood frames are also going to accept the staples when we upholster the fabric on top, and they're going to accept the final trim when we trim over the staples. So I'm just using 2 construction screws on each corner to screw those frames together. And these frames ended up being about 58 inches tall, but depending on your application, you can make these to whatever size you need. And I'm just screwing them into the wall. Normally you would be getting into stud. I was getting a couple studs here, but these are double layer drywall walls. So we're just screwing them straight in, and we're just making this kind of pattern that goes around the window there and kind of wrapping around the room. So I used my laser. I set up my laser at the top level of the room to make sure that the framing is nice and consistent all the way around the room. So you'll see that kind of get installed into the walls here. And here's the other section of the room, the back section where the drums are. And I just had to shorten this frame a little bit to get it to fit there. And then that final frame is in. So here is just the frames. So just the frames are screwed together and they are screwed into the wall. And you can see that they're nicely wrapping around the whole room. This is going to give us a lot of square footage of surface area of absorption. And this is our acoustic insulation that we're using for this application. It is Rockwool Comfort Board 80. What's nice about this stuff is that it's rigid and it's 1.5 inches thick, which is the exact same size as our 2x2 lumber. And what I'm doing is I'm just cutting it to size where I have to and placing it within the frame. And then I'm just adding a couple drywall screws just to hold it in place. These screws are not structural by any means. It's just so that the insulation doesn't fall forward and make the fabric bulge outwards. So it's as simple as just cutting them to size and press fitting them into the frames where you have to, and then just using the screws where you have to. So now we're ready for the fabric. So we're doing the same color scheme that we did in the control room a few years back, which is kind of this dark gray and then a dark navy blue. And what I'm doing is I'm stapling the top 2 corners, and I'm just applying tension to make sure that there's no wrinkles in all directions as I staple this into the frame. And I want to do quite a bit of staples just to make sure that there isn't any sort of air gaps or spots where the acoustic insulation is exposed to air. We want to make sure that that insulation is nice and contained. So the color scheme we're going with here is gray on the back wall and the 2 gray panels on the left and right side of the front wall. And then we're doing the rest of the panels in this dark navy blue, which you see going up right here. And we can just staple that onto the frames, cut off all the excess. And once we have that done, like so, we are ready now for the final trim. So for this client, we ended up going with a knotty pine. I'm using 1x4x8 knotty pine. And this decision was made since it's the cheapest kind of hardwood option that's available for us. You could of course use like a maple or an oak or any sort of hardwood if you wanted a different kind of aesthetic. And what you'll see I'm doing here is I'm just cutting these pieces to size, and I'm gonna frame out that the whole upper perimeter first. You can see I set up my laser, and what I'm doing there, if you look closely, I'm setting my laser up just like almost a 1/2 inch above where the frame ends. That way I can kind of have a nice, consistent, totally level perimeter of trim running around the entire room. You see I'm just stapling, or not stapling, I'm nailing those in with an 18 gauge brad nailer. And you'll see here we're going to do the full upper perimeter first, then I'm going to nail in the full bottom perimeter. I'm going to do the same thing where I set up my laser at the bottom, and that way all of our horizontal trim is completely level all the way around the entire perimeter of the room. As you can see here, that whole top perimeter has been nailed in. And since we use the laser, it's at a totally consistent height all the way around the room. So if there's any inconsistencies in the framing, giving myself that little bit of a 1/2 inch above and below, as you can see there with the laser below the frame, that just gives me a little bit of wiggle room if there is any sort of inconsistency in the frame, that once this final trim is on, that eliminates any visible inconsistency. So I'm just following the laser, nailing in this bottom perimeter of trim. I like to do all of my horizontal trim pieces first, and then I can cut and nail in all of the vertical pieces, which you'll see in a moment here. And once we nail in those vertical pieces, so here's our top and bottom all nailed in. Once we nail in those vertical pieces, then that's it for trim. Then we can just apply all of our wood filler on the nail holes, sand it, and then it's ready for whatever stain or finish you want to apply. Here we're putting in the very first vertical piece, and you can see I'm just cutting it to size. And since we used our laser all the way around the room, all of these vertical pieces should be the exact same length. So it makes it kind of easier for kind of batch cutting them and installing them. But since it's kind of trim and finished trim, you do want to kind of measure twice and cut once. So do check on all of your sizing before you do your cuts. And now I'm using the table saw. Any spot where that framing meets the wall, where there's an exposed side of the initial wall framing, I'm ripping down these pieces of 1x4 to a final dimension that will kind of act as an end cap, which you'll see in a moment here. You can see here where that frame meets the existing window casing. I added in that kind of end cap piece, so that way, no matter which way you look at these acoustic walls, there's always a finished piece of trim that either terminates at the window casing or terminates on the existing client's wall. Now we're going to go around with the wood filler. We're going to fill all of the nail holes and any place where there's a butt joint of two of these pieces of wood kind of connecting to each other. I'm just going to apply some of that wood filler, and then once that is dried, I can go around and just sand everything nice and flat and smooth. What I did was I sanded all of the wood filler spots down flat first, and then I went over with my sander and just kind of gave the entire surface just a light sanding, just so that the stain can kind of go in consistently into the wood. This is the stain that we're using here. It's a Varathane product. The color is called Provincial. And this is the same color and stain that we used in the control room a few years back. So the client wanted to match everything to the control room, which worked out perfect for us to source the exact same fabric and stain as we did in the control room a few years ago. So what I did there was I put masking tape all around where the trim meets the fabric. And since there's a bit of an overhang there, I can actually kind of tuck that piece of masking tape behind the trim, so I can even stain that interior piece without getting the fabric dirty. And once that stain dries, then the process is finished. We just kind of cleaned off the walls of any dust or any kind of residue, cleaned up the room, got it all nice and tidy for the client, and there's your finished product. Really hope you guys enjoyed watching. We have lots of really cool projects on the go for 2025 and even beyond that. So thank you so much for watching. This has been Daniel from soundheadquarters.com. Peace out.